the air was a luxury I could no longer afford. It started as a whistle in my chest, a thin, panicked thread of oxygen that snapped the moment I reached for my bag. My knees hit the hardwood floor with a thud that should have brought them running, but when I looked up through the haze of my blurred vision, I saw only a terrifying, curated indifference. My younger sister, Chloe, stood 3 feet away, the red plastic casing of my rescue inhaler dangling from her manicured fingers like a toy she was teasing a dog with. She didn't move to help, she didn't even flinch. Instead, she leaned in, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice that I had never seen in front of our parents. "Wheeze, failure," she sneered, her voice a low, melodic poison that vibrated in the silent room. I clawed at the air, my fingernails digging into the rug, my lungs feeling as though they were being filled with wet cement. Behind her, on the velvet sofa, my parents sat like statues in a museum of neglect. My mother didn't put down her tea. My father didn't look up from his tablet. They had been told for years by Chloe that I faked these attacks for attention, that I was the drama queen draining the family's energy. As the world began to dim at the edges, turning into a vignette of charcoal and shadow, the last thing I saw was Chloe smirking, her thumb resting mockingly on the inhaler's trigger, making sure I knew that life was hers to give or take. I felt my heart-shaped face press against the cold floor, the hazel light in my eyes flickering toward a permanent dark. They watched me die for 3 minutes, and in those 3 minutes, I realized I no longer had a family. I had a pack of predators waiting for the weak to fall. Survival wasn't a miracle, it was a mistake on their part. They hadn't accounted for Mrs. Gable, the retired nurse next door who had seen me collapse through the bay window and used her spare key to storm inside. By the time she had the nebulizer mask over my face, my parents were already practicing their shocked expressions, and Chloe had tossed the inhaler back into my bag, pretending she had just found it. But I was awake enough to see the panic in her hazel eyes. Not for me, but for herself. 2 days later, while the house was empty, I crawled to the small, decorative shelf where my parents kept a hidden nanny cam meant to monitor the dog. I had installed it myself months ago to catch Chloe stealing from my room, but I had forgotten it was active that afternoon. With trembling hands, I retrieved the microSD card. My heart hammered against my ribs as I plugged it into my laptop. There it was, the full, unedited record of my agony. I watched Chloe mock me. I watched my parents ignore my gasps. I watched the moment they decided my life wasn't worth the effort of standing up. I didn't cry, the tears had burned away in the fire of my realization. I copied the file to 3 different cloud drives and a physical vault. That night, I packed a single suitcase. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out into the cool night air, breathing deeply for the first time in my life, knowing that the girl who walked out of that house was not the same one who had collapsed on the floor. I was no longer the victim. I was the evidence. I moved 3 states away, changed my contact information, and began the long, calculated process of erasing them from my existence while keeping the record of their crimes close to my chest. 5 years is a lifetime when you are fueled by a cold, architectural rage. I didn't just survive, I built a fortress. I became the woman in the maroon blazer, a symbol of structured power and unwavering professional poise. My hair was always in a sleek, tight ponytail, my face a masterpiece of controlled intensity, and my hazel eyes now held a knowing look that unsettled my competitors. I had climbed the ranks of a top-tier forensic accounting firm, earning a reputation for finding the skeletons people thought were buried under miles of digital concrete. I was rich, I was respected, and I was entirely alone by choice, until the letter arrived. My grandfather, the only person who had ever truly loved me, had passed away, leaving behind a massive estate and a will that named me the sole executor. The family I had fled were suddenly destitute, having bled through their savings trying to maintain the illusion of wealth that Chloe's influencer's lifestyle demanded. They were contesting the will, claiming I was mentally unfit and had abandoned them in their time of need. They were suing for filial support, painting me in the press as the heartless daughter who had struck it rich and left her aging parents to rot. They didn't know I had been waiting for this. They didn't know that the girl they called a failure had spent half a decade preparing for this specific reunion. I hired the most aggressive legal team money could buy, not to defend myself, but to go on the offensive. I didn't want a settlement, I wanted a reckoning. I instructed my lawyers to push for a public hearing, to make sure the world saw the loving family they claimed to be. I bought a new maroon power suit, sharpened my jawline with resolve, and prepared to step back into the lion's den. The deposition was a theater of lies. I sat across from them in a sterile, glass-walled conference room, my back as straight as a blade, my hands clasped elegantly on the mahogany table. Chloe sat between our parents, wearing a cheap, theatrical black dress, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked older, her face lined with the stress of a failing social media career and the bitterness of a life she couldn't afford. "We only wanted what was best for her," my mother sobbed into the microphone, her voice a practiced quaver. She was always so fragile, so prone to hallucinations. My father nodded, his face a mask of weary disappointment. "She left us after a particularly bad episode. We searched for her, but she didn't want to be found. Now she wants to take everything our father worked for?" I watched them through my hazel eyes, my expression a calm, professional blankness. When it was Chloe's turn, she looked me directly in the eye, a flash of the old malice sparking behind her fake tears. "She used to fake her asthma attacks to get our attention," she told the lawyers, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "That day she left, she had a minor fit, and we were trying to help her, but she just snapped." I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I simply adjusted the cuff of my maroon blazer and smiled. A tiny, knowing tilt of the lips that made Chloe's eyes widen in momentary confusion. My lawyers filed a motion for a special evidentiary hearing before the final verdict. They argued that the family's caregiving history was relevant to the grandfather's intent for the estate. The judge, a stern woman with a no-nonsense reputation, granted the request. The stage was set. The family thought they were walking into a bank to collect a check. They didn't realize they were walking into a trap I had been baiting for years. The day of the hearing was overcast, the neoclassical stone of the courthouse reflecting the gray, heavy sky. I stood in the garden outside the entrance, the dark green foliage a sharp contrast to the saturated maroon of my blazer. I felt the weight of the moment, the air around me thick with the anticipation of a storm. When I entered the courtroom, the silence was absolute. My family was already there, huddled together on the front bench, looking like a portrait of grieving virtue. Chloe looked at me and smirked, a tiny, triumphant gesture hidden from the judge's view. She whispered something to my mother, and they both suppressed a giggle. They truly believed I had nothing but my word against theirs. They believed that 5 years of distance had eroded my power. The judge took her seat, her gaze sweeping over us. "Before we begin the final arguments regarding the estate's distribution," she announced, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, "the defense has requested to present a piece of character evidence they claim is vital to understanding the family dynamics during the period in question." She looked at me, and I gave a single, sharp nod. "The court will now view a file provided by the executor, titled Living Room Archive. I saw my father's brow furrow in confusion. I saw my mother's hand freeze midair. But it was Chloe who changed first. The smugness drained from her face, replaced by a sudden, sickly pallor. She looked at the large monitors mounted on the walls, her breath catching in her throat. She remembered the shelf. She remembered the camera. I sat down, my hands resting lightly on the table, my heart-shaped face tilted upward as the screen flickered to life. The date on the timestamp was exactly 5 years, 2 months, and 4 days ago. The scene was our old living room. The sound of a girl gasping for air filled the silent courtroom. The video played in a haunting, high-definition silence that was broken only by the sounds on the screen. There was the thud of my body hitting the floor. There were my fingers clawing at the rug. And then, there was Chloe. The courtroom gasped as her sneering face appeared on the monitors, her voice loud and clear, "Wheeze, failure." The image of her dangling the inhaler, her thumb mocking the trigger, was so visceral that the court reporter stopped typing. We watched my parents sit on the sofa, unmoving, as I turned blue. We watched them wait. We watched the moment Chloe realized I was losing consciousness and she simply adjusted her hair in the mirror. The video ran for the full 3 minutes until Mrs. Gable burst through the door. When the screen finally went black, the silence in the courtroom was a physical weight, suffocating and absolute. I turned my head slowly to look at the bench. Chloe wasn't smirking anymore. She was trembling, her hands shaking so violently that her lace handkerchief fluttered to the floor. Then, the sound started, a low, primal animal noise that grew into a frantic, high-pitched scream. She started wailing, her face contorting into a mask of pure terror as she realized the world had just seen who she truly was. My parents were frozen, their faces as white as the neoclassical stone outside. The judge didn't even look at them as she delivered her verdict. The claim for filial support was dismissed with prejudice, the family was stripped of any standing in the grandfather's estate, and the video was immediately referred to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation into reckless endangerment. I stood up, smoothing the front of my maroon blazer, my sleek ponytail catching the light. I walked past them without a word, my hazel eyes fixed on the exit. I stepped out into the garden, the cool air filling my lungs easily, fully, and finally. The girl who had collapsed was gone, the woman who remained was free.